Hey, hi everybody. My name is Luca Pandolfi. I'm the founder of Woodland Biomass Innovations. I'm really excited today to be here with the Bureau of Forestry here in Pennsylvania, with some of the people who are actually out in the forest doing the hard work of maintaining our forests. So the reason I'm here today is because, one of the most common questions, Woodland Bio, we're trying to turn wood into gasoline, right? That's the big pitch, the mission of the company, specifically using low-grade wood. So that's something we're going to learn about today, is the different grades of wood and the different types of material that are produced in the forest and the role they play in maintaining a healthy ecosystem. But you don't want to hear this from me because I'm the founder of a company that's going to turn wood into gasoline. It's more important to hear from the people who are actually experts in forest management and understand forest management on a more fundamental level than I do. I come from more of a business background, marketing background. These are the guys who actually understand forest ecosystems. So while I'm constantly trying to, redistribute the great information that they've given me in previous conversations, I think it's better to take this occasion so that you can hear it directly from them about the role that Woodland Bio and low-grade utilization play in managing healthy forests here in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. If we want to start at the end of the table here.
My name is Ben Carlson. I'm the district forester here at the Tioga State Forest.
I'm Sarah Johnson. I work in the Division of Forest Health as a forest health specialist.
Great. And I'm Eric Butters. I'm the assistant district forester in charge of the resource staff here on the Tioga District.
Beautiful. So you can see a very full house we have here today to really help us understand in detail, going all the way from the history of Pennsylvania forests to where we are today and what are the prescriptions we need to do to have a more healthy forest here. So I want to start, on the history side of that. What was happening in the forest before today? How did we get to the situation we're in today? And for that, I think Sarah is our resident expert on the history of Pennsylvania forests.
Well, when you talk about the history of Pennsylvania forests, you really have to start prior to European settlement in the eastern United States. Native Americans were really good land managers. They knew how to live on the land in a way that would be sustainable for their societies to continue to get from the forest what they needed through time. And that meant a lot of management. They were very proficient users of fire in the woods. They did a lot of forest cultivation, and they lived directly off the land and were sustainable on that for a long amount of time. After that period, once Europeans arrived in the New World, they were building a society. They needed materials. This was what built America. There was an era of about 30 to 40 years, and all of us in the Bureau understand this history very intimately because, as Luca said, it is what gives us what we see today in the woods. We call it the clear-cut era. Around the turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, the vast majority, 99.9% of Pennsylvania was clear-cut to feed a growing nation.
And that's where I think, a lot of the legacy that was left today is that clear-cut kind of left behind, I guess, our hardwood forests, right, is reason we have, from what I've come to understand, a lot more softwood forests were before the clear cutting. And then what was left behind, it was hardwoods, and that has to do particularly with how they propagate, right? Hardwoods grow from seed, where softwoods, how do softwoods propagate? Go ahead, show me again here.
Softwoods propagate from seed as well, and that there was all the disturbance that was caused during that era facilitated species that regenerate in high light conditions most of the time. And the white pine, very favored for ship's masts, for building. White pine was specifically culled out of the woods early on. Then there was a shift to a desire for hemlock because of the tan bark industry. Hemlock was utilized just for the bark, basically, and they utilized the wood for other things as well. But the bark was really important for the tanning industry. So they were then going after the hemlock. So with all of that and all that disturbance that created, a lot of the species that were able to successfully regenerate were more light-loving.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense actually. Yeah, because now you've got a completely cleared ground. So that's where, yeah, as you said, those hardwoods that thrive more in high light situations can come back. So now we're up to, I think the last numbers I heard was around 90% hardwood in Pennsylvania. Is that right? And then 10% softwood. Is that more or less correct?
It feels like it's more softwood, but it's very localized. Our hemlocks in our riparian areas, our white pines on our hillsides. But we do have a large amount of oak-dominated forests now in the state, which that is great for wildlife, a lot of acorns. But what has created, because of the land use, because there's that oak dominance, because of the introduction of chestnut blight in the early 1900s, American chestnut was 60% of our forest back then. And all of that area was basically utilized by oak. American chestnut and oak have somewhat similar life histories as far as their requirements when they regenerate. And all of that area that was vacated by dying American chestnut was taken by oak, most of that area. So now we have canopies that are heavily dominated by oak, much more vulnerable to insects and diseases, especially spongy moth, our most significant non-native invasive defoliating insect. And at this point, fast forward, we are dealing with the impacts of years and years of spongy moth defoliation, and these guys have a lot of salvage harvest going on.
Excellent.
A lot of districts around here do.
And that goes more broadly into the issue of the same age, right? In the canopy, and that's one of the big issues that were left from this clear cut era. Is we had all this growth happen around the same time period, which has left us now with a lot of trees that are around the same age group, right? So this is kind of where I want to open it up and talk more about the issues today with that same age group in terms of ecosystems. But then also looking at it from a perspective, how do we adjust this? How do we fix this issue that we're in right now? So that's kind of where, if you guys want to talk a little bit more about the age group problem and the mosaic approach that you guys are taking to managing it.
Yeah, right. So like Sarah had said, what we were left with at the turn of the century, when they had all the clear cutting that was taking place, what we ended up with is an even age forest. And just like we had talked about earlier, the issues that you run into with an even age forest is, as it gets older, it becomes more susceptible to insect and disease. You end up with more mortality events, lower seed crops. So the Bureau's Forestry going forward, and that's what some of these graphics here represent, we're trying to balance that age class. So that way future managers, once we're long gone, they don't have to deal with the same stuff that we're dealing with. We're trying to create a mosaic of age classes across the landscape. Do you want to add anything to that, Ben?
I think you covered that pretty good. And like you said, though, it's over that, well over that 100-year period where we're striving for this to try to balance that.
And so when it comes to actually trying to do these cuts, then where you're trying to, well, first off, how do you implement it, and what role do the markets play in your ability to implement your prescriptions for the forest?
So each district, we have our harvest model that we're striving for in a given year, and we have a 10-year window where we're striving for. So our removals are 5,000 acres is what we're trying to get over a 10-year period. So we're trying to meet those yearly goals of 500 acres of overstory removals to try to balance that age class over that 120-year period.
Right. So that makes sense. And so we're trying to go in there and pay for the removal of these, right? And so that's where essentially the connection between the market and the forest is, if we don't have markets for the material that's being removed, we can't do those prescriptions, right? Has that been an issue for the board, for the Bureau historically, trying to sell material and not having markets for it?
There's been, ups and downs over the years, for that. Where we're struggling now more is it's that low grade market is where we don't seem to have a lot of people that utilize those. Yeah. In that low grade market, like pulpwood.
Right. So what traditionally would have been the markets for those materials?
The paper mills, a a lot of that stuff. Some of the whole tree shipping operations would have been the markets for those.
Right. And pellet mills as well used a lot.
Yes, there's pellet mills. Yep, they still use that.
Right. And so those are markets that have pretty much been closing down, right? Over the last few years, we've lost a lot of paper mills. I think that's numbers I got from the Department of Agriculture where we used to be, I think it was at around 40 paper mills around Pennsylvania. I think we're down to 3, if I'm remembering correctly right now. So that's, 90% reduction in the amount of demand for this low-grade material, essentially, right? So that's today your biggest issue is really it's that low-grade market then, right? So what happens when you don't have a low-grade market? How does that affect your ability to do your job, and how does that affect the loggers who are actually going out and doing the harvest?
I mean, if there's not the market for it, because we're going to have that material cut. And then it'll stay in the woods, it'll just, and that's good. It's not a bad thing for that because it does go back into the soil, with that, the nutrient value with that, but there's a lot of material that does get left behind. And that varies by different companies. Some have that market where they'll utilize a lot of that, and then there's others that will leave a lot of that material there.
Right. So for the operators, I guess the struggle is how to be profitable on a piece of land where you're only selling half or less of the material that you're actually harvesting. And so that's where, we got our support from the Department of Agriculture. For those who know, we got a grant from the Department of Agriculture for planning our facility. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, they want to develop these low-grade markets. They want to be able to pay for that materials removal, support the logger operators in being profitable. And so with those paper markets gone, with those pellet markets drying up, that's where they were, gasoline is a product that we're going to need as long as we can tell. There's a massive market for it. So if we can figure out how to turn the low grade into that gasoline, we can really help address that need for the low grade markets. The end goal here, I guess, is to create the typical term I hear a lot is the mosaic, right? That's the approach that you guys are trying to take to address this problem of the homogeny and age of the trees, right? So can you explain a bit more about that mosaic approach?
Yeah, so that mosaic, that's what you're striving for across the landscape. There's different plant and animal communities, so we utilize different age classes. So if we can have those kind of scattered across the district, these different age classes, that goes to benefit a whole host of, it just increases the biodiversity of the plants and animals. So kind of going back to what you were talking about there about not having these low-grade markets, we're dealing with a lot of partners, the Rough Grouse Society in particular. They want to create, we've got an abundance of aspen in our district, and this map here just kind of goes to illustrate that. And that's exactly where it's located. The majority of that, it's not viable. I mean, we can't sell these sales because there's no market. If we had a market that was close by, we would be able to sell more of these sales, which would in turn benefit the goals of the Rough Grouse Society as well as our own goals. Right now, we're doing a sale in these aspen stands for harvesting maybe 200 acres of aspen every 2 years, and that's just because we only have 1 or 2 operators that would even entertain the thought of bidding on something like this. If we had some market nearby that we could that would utilize that material, I think you would see an increase in operators that would be willing to bid on those projects. That would go a long way towards increasing the good habitat that's being created on the ground for different species like rough grouse or other early successional utilizing species.
Right. Trying to improve it for ecosystem and rough grouse. For those of you who don't know, they're focused on the ecosystem for the rough grouse, as the name would say. Rough grouse is the bird of Pennsylvania. So they're trying to increase ecosystem habitat for that as well as other animals. So it's not just about improving forest or increasing the amount of forest here. It's also about creating an ecosystem for animals that live in that forest and increasing their populations. And so that's where right now, just to explain also to the users a little bit about this bidding process, because you mentioned no bid a couple of times. So the idea is that you guys need a harvest done, and so you'll put it out to bid to these operators to actually come and do the harvest, right?
Correct, yeah. So our forester staff will delineate an area that we want to treat, whether lately it's been driven by insect and disease issues. We're doing a lot of mortality sales right now, driven by the spongy moth defoliation that happened here in recent history. So yeah, anyhow, the foresters, they'll go out, they'll delineate an area, they'll cruise the timber, and they'll put the volumes out. We'll put together a contract, we'll put it out to prospective bidders, and then the high bidder will be awarded the sale. What we end up, the issue that we run into with low grade sales is if we have a lot of low grade material that's on the sale, nobody wants it because there's no market for it. So we put the sale out, nobody bids on it, and then we're left needing some work done on the ground, but unable to accomplish that because there's nobody that's going to take a financial hit to do something. So those sales go no bid, and then we either have to re-advertise it at a lower rate, or yeah, that's basically what we do. Reach out to prospective buyers and just ask them if this isn't something that would be how we could make it attractive to them to be able to move in and get the work done that we want accomplished on the ground.
Right. That's where the markets directly lead to how many people are willing to make these bids and actually go in the forest and do the harvesting. So I think, with most of the groundwork laid out, right, we understand what's happening in the forest. We understand the history of what's happened there and what our goals are to improve the forest. I think now's a great time to get out in the forest, right, and actually take a look at what we're talking about and look at a harvest and get some feet on the ground. So that's why we're all dressed in our hoodies and our polos, and hey, we're ready to actually get out there and show you guys what things look like in the Pennsylvania forest. So looking forward to seeing you guys out there. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. We're here in the forest. I am shouting at the top of my lungs because we got some true Pennsylvania weather happening today. So this is authentic here, the freezing rain we're experiencing. But we're out here anyway because it's important to see firsthand what's happening in the forest and get an explanation from the experts on what's happening and what we're trying to do. So, want to lead us in?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I wanted to kind of show the regeneration process from start to finish. This is the first stop. This stand here is a stand that was thinned in the past, an intermediate harvest, and what ended up happening is they took out some of the beech that was in here, some of the smaller saw timber, and what we're left with is a bunch of root sprouts that come off of those beech stumps. This is a stand like this. In order for us to start the regeneration process now, here we're moving towards that early succession forest that we're going to be looking at later. The first step coming into a stand like this, in order to try and get the regeneration established on the ground, is what we would have done in the past is we would have had to contract this out as a brush cutting ply. It's an expensive endeavor on our part, upwards of $300 an acre now to come in and remove the beech, birch, and striped maple from 2 inches, an inch, all the way up to 8 inches, in order to open up this mid-story to allow some more sunlight to hit the ground, to allow the seeds that fall from our desirable species, the red maple, the cherry, sugar maple that's on a site like this, an Allegheny hardwood site like this, in order to get those seedlings established and to the point where we can take the overstory off and release that new forest to grow. So if there's any way that we can capitalize on not having to pay to get this stuff removed to start that regeneration process, that would be a benefit, a major benefit for us.
Right, because part of the issue right now is like with this tree that we're standing next to right here as an example, is like this is not high enough grade to be used for pretty much anything else right now. Like there are no other applications for this tree if we cut it down. Is that right?
It will get left laid on the ground. Yep.
Exactly right. And that's where we end up paying for it out of pocket. So a lot of it is trying to add value back to this type of material is a lot of what needs to be removed. And so creating markets for that material will pay for the removal, so that we're not using, for example, tax dollars or donations to be able to do those types of harvests. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do here, is create these values, because while it might look like we've got, part of what I asked when we first arrived at this site is, looking at a glance, we've got some smaller material, some thicker trees, And so you'd think that there was a diversity in age groups here, but part of what they were explaining to me is that even though it might look at a surface level like you've got diversity in age here, we don't actually have a diversity, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's just where the trees, when they develop from that seedling, everything's got its place. The vigorous trees are going to end up in the dominant or co-dominant, where they're going to be the very tippy top. They're going to be your bigger diameter trees. You've got the smaller ones that just didn't have the steam behind them to get up into the overstory. So they've been sitting suppressed underneath this canopy for years, and that's where they end up.
Right, I think that word suppressed is really the important word there, is essentially without enough light coming down there, you've got trees that while they may look young or have actually just been here and haven't been able to grow because they don't have enough resources to reach the canopy and reach their full growth potential. So that's the important part here of thinning these areas out, is so that you can have the trees, select the trees that you want to grow to full size. Is that kind of what you guys are thinking when you come in and try and select what you harvest and what you don't harvest?
So what we're looking at right now is we're looking to start that regeneration process. We're looking to start a whole new forest is what we're looking to do. And a lot of that stems from the fact, if you look around at a lot of these trees, there's issues in the overstory. There's a lot of spike tops. There's a lot of dead branches. And the thing that we're seeing now, because these trees are getting to be a little bit older, is reduced seed crops. And there's a whole host of issues with reduced seed crops, weather events, and there's just a myriad of different things that are causing the reduced seed crops. But one of the bigger issues is because of the age of the stands and the poor health that the canopies are in. They're just not able to throw seed like they did even 15 years ago.
Yeah, so this is where we get into more of the conversation around building a resilient forest, right? Of building a forest that can withstand all these various threats. So that's where we're going to dig in a little bit now. We're going to go take a look at some examples of the threats that the forests are facing and how we mitigate those by building diversity essentially into the forest. So let's take a look over here. We've got some diseased trees we can take a look at. All right, so we've moved over here. Sarah, do you want to tell us what we're looking at?
Yes, and to reference what we were just talking about, American beech is one of our notable hardwood species in our northern and Allegheny forests. American beech, this example here, we were just standing around one, is very threatened by two different non-native invasive disease complexes. I'm going to categorize them both as disease complexes. American beech was attacked early in the 1900s by beech bark disease, which is a complex of a non-native scale insect. All the white flecks on the bark of this tree are individuals of the non-native beech scale. Once the beech scale gets onto the bark of the tree, it creates a small wound as it feeds, and into that wound enters Neonectria, a couple different species of Neonectria caker fungus. They infect the vascular system of the tree in that location, and when you get too many cakers, the tree is girdled and dies. Once American beech is stressed by beech bark disease, or once it is cut, say in a 90s improvement cut that we've done in here personally, then those American beech is very good at root suckering. So you see a lot of these small trees that we were talking about in here, they are suckers that grew up off the root systems of the diseased beech or the cut beech after that injury was made to the tree. So beech bark disease has given us a lot of unhealthy beech trees in our forest, poor quality, and a lot of root suckers, which are small, they're usually suppressed, they inhibit the growth of our desirable diverse region. They do not tend to ever produce mass, so they're not producing any food for wildlife, they're not producing any seed to create a new vigorous tree, and that a lot of that material could just never be utilized. Also, our beech suckers, as well as our overstory beech, but right now, currently, our beech suckers are more threatened by this. They do provide cover to a certain extent. However, right now, in 2012, there was another introduction of a non-native species of foliar nematode, Little Acus crinitae, that is the causal for beech leaf disease. In a few years in this moist, low light, high moisture microenvironment of the understory of this stand, beech leaf disease, can't see it right now obviously, but it will be very virulent on all these beech root suckers, and these trees will die within several years following infestation of beech leaf disease. So we've got a whole complex of stuff happening for our poor beech trees. There is some resistance out there to it, but this has produced a huge amount of material that cannot be utilized and that needs to be dealt with before we can regenerate high quality diverse forest.
And so that's where, we were talking earlier that the solution here to that resilience is promoting diversity, right? And you had, I think it was a few different pillars of diversity you look for.
Yes, resilience is basically a function of diversity in 4 elements: diversity in species composition, diversity in age class, diversity in structure of the forest, and diversity in genetics. If we have diversity in all 4 of those elements, what we have is a forest that's very resilient. All of our forests will always be continually hit by a bunch of different stuff. Obviously, the non-natives are of main concern usually, but there's so many native insects and diseases out there that if we provide an unhealthy, low diversity, vulnerable forest for them, they can have outbreaks of their own as well, just like a non-native. So with diversity in those 4 elements, that is what's going to give us a resilient forest for the future to continue to provide all the benefits that we need from our forests as a society. Yeah.
Well, as you said, this is just one disease we're looking at here, but there's a few others that are ravaging the state, right? What are some of the big ones that you're facing?
Well, the other thing we were talking about in this stand here, particularly the reduced seed crops that we're seeing, and one of the main things that we think about when reduced seed crops to black cherry is a native pathogen, cherry leaf spot. Cherry leaf spot has always been around. It's a native pathogen. We've had, there's been a series of weather events. There's been soils factors, environmental factors. For several different reasons, cherry leaf spot has become pretty virulent on our cherries, and it hits the overstory every year. And all these trees, if you look at them in August, they'll look like it's the middle of October already because their leaves are so spotted up from the pathogen. So that is something year after year. It doesn't kill these overstory trees, but year after year, it's reducing their carbon reserves. It's making them more vulnerable to anything else. So you see a lot of dieback in these tops, like the guys were saying. As they age, they're even more vulnerable to it, and the seed crops are just going down and down, and then we don't have anything to create that next generation.
And so the idea is to try and harvest them before they start dying out naturally and blocking up the ground, right, and stopping new growth from coming in. Or how do we try to rejuvenate essentially and rediversify the forest?
Yeah, and when we operate here, and you guys would be much better to talk about this probably, but we are dependent on natural regeneration. So we want to balance age classes. We want to create a diversity of habitats. We want to get a diversity of regeneration on the ground. And to do that, we need to make space. We need to harvest these trees. And since we depend on natural regeneration, we really want to be doing that while you still have seed sources available. And if we wait too long, falls apart too much, there's no seed source for any natural regeneration.
Right, so you want to basically remove that material while there's still good quality seed in the ground that can come in and kind of replace that.
Or, being supplied by your residuals from your shelter wood harvest, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that explanation. Then we're going to go into some other types of harvest here. So we've got a few different generations of harvest that we're going to take a look at today. So we're going to move over here to one of our next areas and show you some more of the harvesting process. All set. Excellent. Well, here we are at step number 2. The wind has died down, so hopefully you can hear us a bit more clearly here. But we're here essentially to look at the second stage in a regeneration, right? Do you want to explain a bit more?
Yeah. So the second step towards the regeneration process after you've removed the competing vegetation, what we looked at in that first stop up there, is to move into a shelterwood harvest. So Kind of the sequence that we've been dealing with is you remove your competing vegetation, which would be the beech, birch, and striped maple. Usually follow that up with an herbicide treatment to get rid of the ferns that are also competing vegetation on the forest floor. And then you move to a shoulderwood harvest where you end up taking out the mid-story shade that's growing in the site, popping some holes in the overstory by removing some of the larger co-dominant trees. That makes it more attractive to buyers. In the absence of a pulpwood market or a pulpwood market, so that's what that's what you're looking at right here. A stand that's a little more open. It's got more sunlight hitting the ground. And what ends up happening when you have all that sunlight hitting the ground is what you're looking at right here behind you. You've got herbaceous growth and you've got seedlings that are established. And once we have the seedlings, the diverse range of species, once we get them to a certain height that we're comfortable that they're actually going to survive, that's when we'll move towards the last step in the regeneration process, which is going to be the overstory removal tree.
Right. So once you're sure that you've got the next generation and that it's ready to propagate, that's the last step, that is to remove the current overstory to make space for that new generation to explode and really take over.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, as you look around this layer right here, this is an Allegheny hardwood site. So it's predominantly black cherry that's growing on this site right now. Like Sarah had talked about earlier, with the prevalence of cherry leaf spot increasing, and the impact that that's having on the health of the overstory, what we're focused on here is a diversity of species. So it's kind of, it's doing that here on the ground right now. If we were to take a walk around here and look, we've got red maple, we've got sugar maple, we've got cherry to a lesser degree than we have in the current stand, but that's just because of the issues that we're talking about earlier with the seed drops and not having the consistent seed drops. The regeneration that starts on the ground of the cherry seedlings, having that pathogen rain on them, we're losing entire cohorts of black cherry seedlings. So by being able to diversify what's growing on the ground, across this site, there's stuff that's popping up in here that isn't even present in the site right now, like tulip poplar. If we look around in here, there's tulip poplar that's actually showing up on the ground, and there wasn't a single tulip poplar on this entire sale when we marked it. Oak is coming in here a little bit more. There are scattered oak in the overstory, but the abundance of oak that's in the new forest is going to be much greater than what's growing here. So if you have, like she was talking about, it, diversity is going to make it more resilient going into the future. So if you have something that impacts one species, like black cherry, it's not going to wipe your stand out. You're going to have something else there to kind of fill in the gaps. And
That's right. Yeah. So that's where, I mean, I guess it really speaks to the ability for the forest to recover given the right circumstances, right? That we can see species that weren't even there coming back if it's given the right treatment. But the core part of that, of course, is the removal of the low-grade material that we looked at earlier to make space for this desirable diversity of material that's going to give us that resilience that we were talking about as well.
correct. And even in the shoulderwood process. So people don't like to, if you talk to any buyer, and I was hoping the one logger was actually going to be here so we could talk to him. Everybody wants to cut a removal stand because all the pulpwood, all the brush, everything has been cut. They're just cutting the bigger trees. More volume on the landing equals more money in their pocket. Nobody wants to cut a shoulderwood because with the shoulderwood, you're taking out a lot of that the smaller diameter stuff. Most of the while that just gets cut and left lay on the ground. If you had a market where you could capitalize and utilize that material, you might have people that are a little happier to be cutting a shoulderwood than what they are now. So
Right. Getting rid of that no bid problem that we were talking about when we were back at the office earlier.
right.
Yep.
And helping the operators to be sure of their margins
Yeah.
when they're buying these places.
Right. And that's where, we work with the operators directly on, helping them understand what we can represent so they cannot then understand what can we harvest and do it profitably and have the right margins. And that's where, those low-grade markets are in desperate need, is why we're happy to play a role in supporting Pennsylvania forest ecosystems. So are there any other major points that you wanted to look at on this side, or are we ready to move on to site number 3?
I think we're ready to move on to site number 3 to see the final step in the process.
Excellent. All right, let's go see. All right, we're here at site number 3 to see the third and final step, right, in the regeneration process here. So yeah, walk us through what we're looking at.
Yeah, so like just in the last site, the shelterwood sequence we were in, this site looked just like that not too awful long ago before the buyer came in and cut this. So the regeneration was set here. We came in and did the timber sale. So now this is in the final stage where the buyers come in, cut all the material. The residual trees are left here. They'll stay here, and as you can see behind us, this is all that's left that the buyer didn't utilize. So you see in that is a lot of top wood that's still it's present in the stand here, and then there's also pulpwood that maybe wouldn't have been utilized with that as well.
Right, and so so I guess a lot of the part of what we want to show you guys here is the difference between, first off, slash and pulpwood. So slash being the treetops, right, the leaves, all the really small diameter material like what we have right here. Then your pulpwood being the thicker, chunkier pieces of trees. Now we want the slash to stay behind, right?
Yeah,
like that's a part of.
So we reserve the top wood in most of our timber sales, where on saw timber the 8 inches and up, and then in the pulpwood 4 inches is up is what we usually reserve in an overstory removal sequence here, just to protect the seedlings that are there from deer browse, and also for those nutrients to go back into the soil.
Right, so for nutrient cycling. So that's really the important part, right? I think in the truck, I was hearing that the majority of the nutrients are stored in those treetop areas, right? Like the leaves and this really small diameter bark and like that, right?
Yep, and then they break down into that soil and it help with that next cohort of regeneration in there.
Right, so that's the most important part of the tree to leave behind for the nutrient cycling and all these other benefits, but the actual pulpwood, the part that has energy in it, that part isn't necessarily beneficial to the cycling, is it?
It's all beneficial, to have that, but it's just that it's the markets, where we don't have that. A lot of it isn't utilized because they don't have a place to take it.
Right. And so that's where I guess coming in here, you're trying to make a profitable operation. You're a logger operator, right? You're running your business. You're trying to actually stay profitable and pay your employees and everything else that they do. And so part of that is you need to sell the material from the site. Right now, they're being profitable purely off of saw logs, right? And the stuff that's actually going to the sawmill.
In a lot of cases.
In a lot of cases. There is some pulp, of course. We still have, as we said, 3 paper mills, and we have a few pellet mills. And there are companies who also do a few construction materials and other really fun stuff out of that pulpwood, but just not enough of it, right? And we can see that here. I mean, we're going to give you guys some close-up videos here of the actual canopy in here, but you're going to see so much large diameter material that's under 8 inches, as you said.
Yeah.
But more than 4 inches, right? That's the range we're looking at, 4 to 8 inches.
Yeah, that 8-inch limit, like I said on the top wood, that's what a lot of it's left, and there's, as you can see in here, there's a lot of it that's over that wasn't utilized just because they didn't have the place to market that.
To send it, exactly right. Yeah. So this is one of the stages in the regeneration again. So we come in that stage 1 a lot in terms of helping to remove the low grade, and then again at this final stage when you're trying to remove the overstory to give space for those new trees to come in and grow. Those are kind of the 2 areas where you're generating a lot of these kind of medium low grade materials.
Middle stage too.
Middle stage.
All stages. Yeah.
Continuously. So yeah, it's where you see it's throughout the process. We have these pulpwoods, these medium low grade materials that don't have a home right now, but that do need to be removed. And so we're ultimately trying to create markets, trying to turn those into sustainable energy that we can use to fuel our communities. At the same time as we create employment, right? That's a big thing that suffered a lot in Pennsylvania is the decrease in employment in the forest sector. And we want to bring that back by creating new markets and new value for those products, essentially. Did we miss anything out here, or are we ready to go? I think our last stop today, we're going to go and take a look at a landing where they've actually done the harvesting, look at an operator and see the type of material that they're taking off of the site and what's being left behind at one of those landings. So I think that's our next step, right? Excellent. All right. We'll see you guys out there. Hey, everybody. We haven't moved. We're back at site number 3 here. We thought of one more thing we wanted to talk about before we moved on from this site. So as we were discussing after we took the camera off, we were talking a little bit about coarse woody debris, right? And the importance of that in the ecosystem.
Yes, yeah. Coarse woody debris is really important in many different size classes in the forest. It provides substrate for microbial activity, for our decomposers, our saprobes, or etc. A huge diversity of the microbial community that we have in these forests. Really important for that, really important substrate for new growth. Lots of things utilize that coarse woody debris. So we were discussing how in an unmanaged forest, there will be a variety of size classes of that coarse woody debris from trees just naturally falling over or from blowdown or whatever. And in our managed forests, how do we replicate that? How do we ensure that we continue to have that ecological feature in these forests even though they're managed? Obviously, right now, we have a whole lot of size classes of all sorts of coarse woody debris out here. But what we're talking about is taking more of it to be able to utilize that as biomass in the facility. So what we might discuss is how we're still going to meet those ecosystem guidelines, what we know from all the data that we've collected in different kinds of forests, that how much is out there, how much normally supports those communities that we want to support with us. Do we leave some? Do we retain some in certain classes? And even though we're doing that, there is still a massive amount of material out here above and beyond that would be able to be taken and still have a wide variety of sizes of coarse woody debris on the ground to provide that habitat that it would be providing.
So in essence, saying that we need the coarse woody debris, but right now we're leaving way more of it than we need to on the ground just because of a lack of markets. And we'd still try to leave that material behind, as she's saying. We'd follow the prescriptions from the experts on how much of that we can take sustainably. And still leave some of that material behind, but the essence is right now there is way more of it than what is actually needed simply because of a lack of market. So it's balancing these ecological needs with the human energy needs and the community needs, and trying to reach a nice balance between all of those. And that's what we're going to be working closely with DCNR and all of our foresters to make sure we're meeting those guidelines at the same time as we're getting the resources we need for energy production. So with that, I think now we are actually ready to move on to the final site. So we're going to get moving here, unless maybe you see another clip in a few minutes, but we'll see what happens. All right, here we are at site number 4. So here we're looking at a landing. This is after they've done harvest. This is essentially where they deposit and sort the different grades of material to decide what markets it's going to go for. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about the material we're standing in front of and what it might be, what kind of stuff this material could be used for?
Sure, yeah. So what we're looking at here is the load of solid basswood that came off of the same sale that we've been on. The likely markets they're going to be using this. Sometimes they have market for chicken bedding that they'll shade those and use that for. This one, I believe that they're using it for shutters to produce something like that. Has some molding and things like that, and it's more of a softer wood, so it's good for things like that.
So really, you're just looking at what species are available, what size and grade are there, and then basically trying to find the market that best fits what you have available. Is that right?
5 species. Yeah, find that niche. They get that market and get that materials.
Right, and so that's where, I mean, certain species obviously have a much higher demand than other ones. Here in Pennsylvania, we're known for a few of our hardwood species, but so there is a scenario where a specific species might be cut down. You might have a really nice, thick, straight piece like this, but it might still be used for energy just because there isn't a demand for that specific species.
It could be. Yeah.
Right, okay, so that's where it's not as simple as just saying, it's the right diameter and it has the right length to be a saw log. It also has to be the right species on top of that to make it into those markets. And so that's where if you can't make it into those saw grade markets, you need to get a bit more creative, right? And what you do with that material these days.
Yeah, like so historically, like beech, for instance, so on the birch, a lot of that stuff, the bigger stuff, maybe going to pulpwood, for those markets as well.
Right, excellent. So we do have a pile of pulpwood to show you guys here as well. So we're going to move over a little bit to a different pile of wood to show you some pulpwood and talk a little bit more about where that type of material might end up going. Hey everybody, we are here at our second to last stop here for today. So what we have here is a pile of pulpwood. So one of the first things you'll probably notice with this pile compared to the previous pile we were at is just a smaller diameter. That's one of the big things that decides whether you go for saw logs to be sent to a sawmill, turned into construction materials and furniture, versus whether you're being used more for biomass energy or really anything else. That's part of what we're going to talk about here is as the paper markets for this material have dried up and we've got less and less paper mills operating, operators have had to get more creative with how they use this material, where they send it. So you guys were telling me about some examples, right, of where this material might go. It's I think you were saying firewood, is that right?
Yeah, a lot of these pulpwood markets, you know, they'll collect them to sell for firewood to consumers out there, you know, locally to heat their homes.
Right. Is there anything else besides energy and paper right now that this kind of material is used for? I love that answer. I love that answer. It's actually the answer I wanted. Because that's it, is there aren't really any applications,
Yeah,
right?
with losing like the other markets, you know, those with the paper reels, like you said, there's just not the markets for it like there once was.
Right.
And then people put
Craigslist or like Facebook
was drawing a blank, if I could help you.
if I can figure it out.
Per diem itself. Gosh.
Quota.
They put on quota. Thank you. There you go. As things were put on quota, you know, then they're limited in what they could even take in. So then a lot of that stuff, because they couldn't bring it out, it would just sit there, and they'd have to move on to other sales. So that it would just sit in the.
And so you've got landings where you've got this type of material just got basically left behind because there was nowhere for it to go. And so that's really where, again, we're having to get creative with how we use it today, or end up leaving it behind altogether because there's no market for it. And this is exactly the type of material that would run best in the woodland biosystem. As we mentioned earlier, we can also use some of the even smaller diameter materials, but a lot of that we want to leave behind, right? As we were talking earlier with nutrient cycling. So we try to leave as much of that really small material, but it's this kind of mid-sized material that's perfect for energy generation. You know, when you're doing for firewood, for example, having them be nice and straight is still helpful because that helps you cut clean pieces of firewood right out of it. But when you're turning it into gasoline, it doesn't even have to be straight. We can take bent pieces and other pieces that can't go into any other application, essentially, that we can easily turn into energy by chipping it up and converting it into gasoline through our woodland bio process. So this is really the type of material we're interested in. What you see here between these two piles over here is probably, you know, maybe a full truckload, maybe somewhere around 20 tons per day. The woodland biosystem will be consuming around 600 tons per day. So you can imagine a day we're going to need basically around 50 truckloads per day, 50 to 60 truckloads per day, bringing in this material every day. So, you know, right now an operator will struggle just to sell these couple piles, where we're talking about really large quantities that will support the industry, that will create the revenue they need to grow, to hire new people, and to support sustainable forestry practices. So I think that's most of our tour done today, you know, going all the way from history to where we are today in the forest, the prescriptions we need to do to improve it. So I have one last thing I want to do with you today here. I have my Biltmore stick. This is one of my most cherished possessions. It was given to me by the Allegheny Hardwood Utilization Group when I came to do a talk at their forestry forum. It was given to me because I talked there. I don't actually know how to use a Biltmore stick. That's the embarrassing part. So I'm going to ask one of the professionals here today to show us how a Biltmore stick works. We're going to go into the forest a little bit here and show you exactly how one of these Biltmore sticks is used. Excellent. All right, so here we are, final stop for today. We're going to learn how we measure trees, how we use a Biltmore stick. So what is this for?
Yeah, so the Biltmore stick, it's used to get the diameter of the tree, and then on the other side of it, you can pace out a chain, which is 66 feet, hold it up, look where your clear section of stem is, and it'll give you the approximate height of what that tree is. So once you know the diameter and the height, you can come up with the board foot volume in the tree. So this one here, basically it's really simple to use. You just hold it out at arm's length. You line this end up with the edge of the tree. Look over here on this edge.
Like 24?
At your angle, that's the way it looks.
no, yeah, I'm on the side here. I can't see clearly.
So when I'm looking straight in on it, it's going to be between 16 and 18 here on your Biltmore stick. So it's going to be roughly, it'll be, depending on the shape of the tree. If it's an oblong tree with a Biltmore stick, you're supposed to measure it on two sides, add them and average them.
Right.
To get really close. What we use now, it's a little bit quicker for scaling timber. We use a diameter tape so we can double check to see if the Biltmore stick was accurate. And right there, it's just a little over 17 inches. So it would be a 17-inch tree. We already walked out and hit the height with
Has on this side, right? This is where you would be able to measure out the number of, it was 8-foot increments, you said?
8-foot logs on that. Yep.
Right. So here, for those of you who can't see, it's got a little, where is it? It was the 25 feet. There it is. Oh, 25-inch reach. So that's how far you need to hold it from your base when you're measuring, and then how far you need to walk is at the 66?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so you would need to walk out 66 feet from this tree, and then you'd hold it up at an arm's length, and essentially that would be able to give you how many 8-foot logs you'd be able to get out of the tree. Is that right?
Yeah, you hold it, you kind of visualize it looking beside the tree at that distance, put this where your stump is going to be, and then look up to where your clean log ends. And we came up with 4 8-foot sections, so that's roughly a 2-log tree. So we got 17-inch diameter 2-log tree. If we had our volume table here, we could calculate how many board feet are actually in this tree.
Right. Excellent.
So that's not something that, as you're cruising timber, you're going to be doing the diameter at every tree. Your heights, you're not going to want to pace out 66 feet on every tree, or it'd take you forever to mark a stand of timber. It's just to calibrate your eyes, so that way when you're actually out cruising timber, you can get a good accurate volume to put out to your prospective bidders, so that way they have an idea of what's on site. They'll come in, once we put the prospectus out to all of our buyers, they'll come in, they'll bring their own foresters in from the mills that they work for. They'll cruise the timber, they'll look at their numbers, they'll look at our numbers, they'll look at the markets that they have for specific species, and they'll bid according to that. So some buyers have different markets than other buyers. Something that may not be worth a whole lot to one company may be worth something to somebody else, and that's how you get that whole bidding process.
Yep. So the more efficient you can be, the more of that material you can use, the better of a bid you can put up, essentially, and the more you can get value out of that stand, right?
Yeah, I mean, you owe it to the people that you're putting the projects out to, that you're going to be close with your numbers, so that way they can bid according to that.
Right. They need to know they're going to, be profitable at the end of it all. So yeah, that's where we're trying to reach that middle ground between preservation and markets. And that's where these sticks come into play in helping to estimate the amounts when we're putting these harvests out for bid. So that was, I think, everything that we're going to do out here in the forest. We might do a quick short scene when we're back at the office here, when we're all dried up and warm again, just to tune out. But otherwise, thank you guys for joining us, and I hope this has been an educational experience. All right. Hey, everybody. Luca, we're back here at the office. We have fantastic time outside, but we're ready to get warm and get cozy and be comfortable indoors for our little bit. So I just want to say thank you to our fantastic team here at DCNR, at the Bureau of Forestry, for taking us out, for educating, and we're really looking forward to seeing how this turns out. So thank you, Sarah, Ben, and Eric, for joining us today. It was a real pleasure, picking your brains and learning about your craft. So thanks for joining us, and hope to see you guys again soon.
So thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.